Well, this is a great honor. Eric Metaxas, most important of all, is a scriptwriter for VeggieTales. And he has some other things. He's also a New York Times #1 best-selling author of Martin Luther, If You Can Keep It, Bonhoeffer, Miracles, 7 Women, 7 Men, and Amazing Grace. He has written more than 30 children's books, including the bestseller Squanto. My kids want you to sign our copy of it. And The Miracle of Thanksgiving, and It's Time to Sleep, My Love. His books have been translated into more than 20 languages. My book has not been translated yet, so. Somebody translated it into English. My editor translated mine. He is the editor, he's the host of the Eric Metaxas radio show, a national syndicated radio program heard in more than 120 cities around the US, featuring in-depth interviews with a variety of guests. But his most famous guest is me. No, I'm just kidding. He was so nice. He invited me on his show 3 times. And the first time I was on it was the day before the election in 2016. Remember that, Eric? And if you listen to his shows, you will realize that Eric is a very, very funny person. He's got a great sense of humor. He's a great guy. I've had a chance to hang out with him a couple of times at NRB and stuff. It's a really busy place, but I got to get to, and then, so the Christmas, on my second show, I sent him an email saying, I know I'm coming on your show in a week or so, but I have this really Indian version of Jingle Bells. And if you know anything about Indian music, it's Bhangra, which is like, oh, ballet, ballet. So it goes like jingle bells, jingle bells. Anyway, so if you want, I know, now you all want to see it, come to our Facebook page. I'll post it up there anyway. So I send that to him, and within like minutes, he goes, we have to have this on the show. So that was my bumper music when I came on the show. So he's a great guy. He recently had a great debate with David French on if Christians should vote for Trump or not. You don't need to guess which side he was on. I would recommend that if you have Christian friends who are stupid enough not to think that they should be voting the right way, you should have them listen to that debate. Eric recently wrote a book called If You Can Keep It. Oh, I got to say this. So my daughter's not here, but I'm going to tell the story about her. So the first time I was going to be on Eric's show, I said, you know Mary Catherine, she was 9 at the time, and I said, hi, Mary Catherine, I'm going to be on Eric Metaxas' show. And she said, more taxes, more taxes. I told him this story on his last show. She said, why would anyone want more taxes? Now, this was 4 years ago when Greek was going through this horrible financial crisis. I said, no, he's Greek. She goes, oh, Greek, look what happened to them, socialism. And then she said, I bet he's voting for Hillary Clinton. I said, no. So she listened to the show, and she said, yeah, he's not voting. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, give a warm VAC welcome to my friend, Eric Metaxas.
Wow. I should probably not say this, but I hate Indian people. I'm sorry. Yeah. No, you know, that's not true. I just hate you, Neil. I do. No, I hate people with accents. It offends me. It's not right. Let me tell you something. What a blessing to be here. It's very hard for me to communicate to you what a gigantic blessing it is, how encouraged I am to come into a room of people who think the way you do and have some idea that you might want to hear what I have to say. Because it's not that way in my house. Yeah. It just means more to me than you realize. I want to say, praise the Lord. It just blesses me so much to be here. And it's a kind of funny thing because isn't it interesting, you know, I think the people who are really not racist feel free to say things like, I hate Indians and I don't like Neil's accent. But if you're like really afraid to say stuff like that, maybe it's because you are racist or you're so confused and whatever. All of that is not American, folks. In America, if you have any brain in your head, you understand that, of course, we're a nation of immigrants, of people from all kinds. My parents have accents, okay? Good American accents, not foreign ones. No, that's not true. That was a joke. My father, who's 93, praise Jesus, has a strong Greek accent. My mother, who doesn't give out her age, But she has a strong German accent. And what I love is that is America. The idea... The idea that we had two people up here with accents talking, whatever, I thought to myself, folks, that's America, okay? Because those people with accents, like my mom and dad, are literally as American as George Washington because we believe in an idea. It is not about an ethnic background or about what. We buy into an idea of self-government. And if you buy into that and you become a citizen, you are as American as apple pie, as Chevrolet, as Hyundai. No, just kidding. But I mean, it's an amazing thing. And the reason I start here is because I didn't really get this until just a few years ago. And I think a lot of people have some idea about me, like I knew all this stuff, and then I decided to put it into a book. In almost every case, with every book that I have written, I start from a position of ignorance, and I say this because it's true, and because I don't want anyone to think that you yourself can't learn what I learned. I mean, when I wrote about Bonhoeffer, I knew very little about Bonhoeffer. When I wrote about Wilberforce, I knew very little about. I just knew enough that I knew I wanted to write about them, but I do my research as I go along. But the story of my book, if you can keep it, I have to tell you, I was ashamed and embarrassed when I realized what I didn't know about America and liberty and how faith comes into it. And it was as a result of reading a book by my friend Os Guinness. Some of you know Os Guinness. You should have Os Guinness here. He's way older than Charlie Kirk. And by the way, I know Charlie Kirk very well, and he's a jerk. He's a real jerk, Neil. Neil, I take back everything I said. Honestly, what a jerk. No, I know him. He's half my age, so I can say anything I want about him. There's nothing he can do. Biblically, I could say anything. So, and he needs to respect me. But the point is that I forgot what I was saying. Oh, no. My book, If You Can Keep It, before I launch into Os Guinness and If You Can Keep It and all that, let me just ask, how many of you will be at the church service tomorrow morning here? So a lot of you. So I want to make sure I don't repeat myself too much. So, and I want to do Q&A here because we can't do that in the church service. So I just want to say this about Os Guinness's book. When I read it, he sent it to me and, flattered me with the idea that maybe I could read it and give him an endorsement. Now, you have to understand, I revere Os Guinness so much. It's like John Milton or Chaucer asking you for an endorsement, And I think to you don't know who they are? Yeah, they're English writers. And you're obviously not homeschoolers, those of you who didn't laugh. So, but I was amazed when I read his book because I realized that I, who, got a decent education and became a Christian around my 25th birthday, that I still didn't get this stuff. And so when I got it, and I'll tell you what it is, I was just so ashamed and sickened that if I don't get this stuff, how can we be functioning as a nation? What I mean is, when I said what it is to be an American, right, it's an idea. If it is an idea, then it means that the people who are Americans need to get the idea, right? In other words, if being a Frenchman, all you need to do to be a Frenchman is, not to bathe, for example. And now, is that appropriate? I got to tell you, not everything is a big joke. You should not laugh at that stuff. That's Francophobia. That's not right. But the point is that, to be a Greek, to be a German, you don't have to do anything. You're born there. That's your language, whatever. I mean, basically speaking. America is a bizarre thing. It's an idea. Now, just because most of the founders, came from England and blah, 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 it doesn't really matter. It's an idea. They came up with an idea that anyone can buy into this idea and govern themselves, but the idea had never been done in the history of the world. I mean, this is the problem, is that we take for granted everything we have. We have self-government, we have liberty, and most of us go, so, whatever. I mean, maybe not most people here because you're a certain kind of person to be here tonight, but I got to tell you, most Americans and most Christians don't appreciate the wildness of the idea of self-government and liberty, and don't understand what it requires to keep it alive. They don't understand that it's not normal. Liberty and self-government are not the normal way. The normal way is to live like animals and to have some strong tribal chieftain, the strongest guy, rule over you, and if you're lucky, he's not that evil, or to have a king or some tyrant or some group rule over you, and then maybe somebody plots and they kill them, and then somebody else takes power. That's the way it's been since the beginning of time. And that is the normal way of fallen human beings. So the idea that in the 18th century, some guys got together and seemed to think, oh, we think we could pull something off that's never been done in the history of the world ever. Now, why would they think something like that? You have to ask yourself that, right? Because most of us don't, and we take it for granted. We go, well, that's just, humankind evolves, and we just get better and better, and that's what leads to the death camps and stuff, right? No. Why? Well, it has everything to do with the gospel of Jesus Christ, which you ought to hear in public schools, and you ought to hear about George Whitefield, and you ought to hear about all this stuff. You ought to get this background, but most people never hear this stuff. And especially if you're my age and younger, you just didn't hear this in school. Or maybe, there was a paragraph in your social studies book in 8th grade, and, that was that. And then if you had the fortune or misfortune to go to university like Yale University, where I went, well, you were sure that they untaught whatever you learned about these ideas at the university. Yale is the kind of a place where they were way ahead of the curve in terms of the woke lunacy. This was like in the 80s when I was there. They were like totally on top of this, and of course now it's spread through. And if I ever had a dime, I wouldn't give it to them. And I have no, it's one of these things that all I can tell you is that these places are spiritually tremendously dark places. But I went in there like, an innocent. I had no idea. I grew up in a working class background. I want to tell you a little bit about how I grew up because it relates to what I'm talking about. But let me just say that my parents did come from Europe. My dad came from Greece. My mom came from Germany. And they met in an English class in New York City. Not a Chaucer Milton English class. You understand what I'm talking about, right? And to this day, they make grammatical mistakes, and I correct them all the time. It's terrible. It's really shameful. I just think it's so beautiful. That's so American, isn't it? They met in an English class in New York City, and they got married. And now, if you're raised, I always say this, if you're raised half Greek and half German, by definition, that means you will be raised Greek. Do you understand that? Do you know any Greek people? Okay, because Greek people, they know they're the best ethnicity. They don't mean anything by it. It's just a fact, and they know that, and they don't have any patience for anybody else. And so but they're very generous because they will make you an honorary Greek. You know what I'm saying? They will do that. Like and they do that just by saying, don't ever talk about whatever it is that you are, and we'll just talk about being Greek and stuff. So my mother, a good wife, decided, to convert to the Greek Orthodox Church and all that stuff. And so we were raised straight up Greek, right? So now the problem, of course, and I have a book coming out called Fish Out of Water, I guess in February it'll come out, where I talk about how bizarre it is to grow up in the Greek Orthodox community, grow up in that community, but have a German mother. Because at home, all the Greeks speak Greek. Of course, it's the best language, obviously, right? Euripides, Plato, whatever, they all wrote in Greek. The Bible's in Greek. Everyone knows it's the best language, so why would you speak in any other language, right? So they speak in Greek. But in our house, because my mother didn't speak Greek, my father didn't speak German, we spoke English. So I would hang out in the Greek, church, and always felt a little bit like a fish out of water. I don't really belong because we're not really Greek. My mother's German. We were kind of ashamed. To this day, I'm ashamed of my mom. She's not. She's just not Greek enough, and it's wrong, and that's wrong. You people need to change. So, but my father would joke around. He would joke around that when we had poetry, tragedy, Aristophanes, Euripides, your people were wearing sheepskins and living in caves, like that. It's like, and by the way, that's correct. That's like 400 BC. That's what the Germans were doing. So he has a point, okay? So, but my parents raised me to love America. Now, why would they raise me to love America? It's very simple. Because they didn't start their lives here. They weren't dumb enough to think this is normal. They grew up in war-torn countries. My father grew up in Greece, where when the war was over, he didn't even get to go to school during the war, right? Because he was a teenager and there's bullets flying around. It was a horrible scene. So he doesn't get to go to school. And he loses his father. And then after the World War II ends, the Greeks got into a civil war with the communists. So my father knew how evil the communists were, and he raised me that way to understand what communism is. My mother lost her father in the war and grew up in what became East Germany, communist East Germany, and she hated it so much that at age 17, she escaped by herself to West Germany, and unfortunately was killed at the age of 18, and they never heard from her again. That's even dark for me. I've never said anything like that before. I apologize. No, but my mother escapes at age 17. At age 19, her mother and sister, my Tante Eleanor, who was on the phone with 2 days ago, they come over to West Germany to get away from East Germany. But all my relatives were in East Germany. So when my mother comes to the United States, and when my father comes to the United States, they are thrilled to come to the United States. My father only was able to come here because there was a massive earthquake in Cephalonia. That's the island where my family's from. I was literally there 3.5 weeks ago. And basically, because of that earthquake, there was a refugee quota. And my father was able to come here legally and become an American citizen. My mother's a wetback. But that's not true. You do not use that term. Listen to me. You people, you got to get serious. That's just wrong. No, my mother also became a citizen. But the point is that they raised me to love America. My father, of course, raised me to love Greece a little bit more. I don't want to get into that. But the point is they raised me to love America. And so in a weird way, when I was among Americans, we moved to Danbury, Connecticut, and I stopped going to the Greek parochial school and went to regular public school and stuff. I found myself in this position where I thought, we're really Europeans, because everybody here that grew up in America and their parents grew up in America, they don't really get it. It's kind of weird. They didn't really understand how great it is to be in America. They were like, what are you talking about? This is normal. And we were like, no, this is not normal. Nobody's trying to kill you. There's no communism. It really is a funny thing that my parents raised me that way. And I noticed it, that they had a particular love for this country because they understood what it was like to live in some other place. And I have to say that I grew up with that without even realizing it. And then, of course, I had the misfortune of going to Yale University. Now, I'm not really joking when I say that. It's the American dream, the working class immigrants to have a kid able to go to a place like that. But as soon as I got there, I realized, I thought, okay, now I'm going to learn how the cultural elites think. These are the successful people. Everybody wants to go here, right? Well, pretty soon it dawned on me that they think radically differently, that they had already, this is in the early to mid 80s, absorbed a kind of anti-American narrative. Patriotism was not cool already, right? And I kind of thought, well, that's weird. Patriotism was cool in my working class town growing up in Danbury, Connecticut, but patriotism was not cool. And that narrative that really gripped the culture in America in the 60s, right? It's an anti-heroic narrative. It's a narrative that basically says that we don't have heroes. We have anti-heroes. That in the 60s we started getting those movies with anti-heroes, right? That everything's nuanced, and when we don't want to celebrate George Washington or anybody because they're all flawed and they've all got, we kind of stopped that, right? Now there's something sick about that because frankly everyone is flawed except Jesus, in case I need to point that out. But the idea that you cannot celebrate someone who is flawed. I mean, if you find me a landowner in the 18th century, a major landowner in Virginia who didn't own slaves, I would say, go to the head of the class because they didn't exist, right? That doesn't mean slavery is okay. But I'm saying, like, if you're going to focus on that and not focus on other things, you're kind of missing the point. I think we established in this country a couple of years back that we're against slavery, right? 600 white boys died so that we could end slavery. 400 of them, obviously, were on the Union side. But the point is, like, we never kind of thought, like, when we say, hey, Abraham Lincoln, or George Washington was great, or we're not like forgetting that they were flawed human beings. But somehow the narrative turned and we focused more on the negative side of things. Now, the reason that's kind of sick is you need heroes. You need to be able to look up to people. You need to understand what people have done. And I don't know anybody, as I said, who's not flawed. So if you're going to play that game, which is now we've come to see the real fruit of it in the cancel culture, that anything you ever said can and will be held against you and hung over your head like it's the only thing you ever said. That is the voice of the devil. That's the voice of the accuser of the brethren. It is evil to do that. I just say, imagine how you treat a kid. Imagine any parent with a kid, right? You say, well, I love my kid. Is your kid perfect? Well, no. Well, when your kid does something really wrong, what do? Well, a bad parent says, I do nothing, right? Another kind of bad parent says, I beat that kid over the head with what they have done forever, even if they stop doing it. I'll never let them forget what they did. That's a different kind of bad. A healthy, loving parent says, I will point out to you what you did wrong. I want you to repent of it. I want you to change. I want you to get better. And I want to celebrate with you when you get better. I want to say to you, attaboy, attagirl, I've noticed that you're not doing that thing anymore. You're doing that thing less. I want to celebrate with you. But a bad parent would say, you know what? You're just like your father. You're just like your mother. You will never change. That is cursing someone. Now, the power of the tongue. If you're a Christian, you understand. You can curse people. And there are people that have been cursed by their parents. That's the antithesis of love. Love is to call out a sin. You don't ignore the sin. You call it out. So the sin of slavery, the sin of Jim Crow, the sins against the Native Americans, whatever, we need to address them. And by the way, we have addressed them, right? You address them. You do stuff. And to have a war like a civil war, folks, let us not forget, that was an unbelievably violent, horrible conflict in which young boys died. We didn't turn a blind eye to slavery. We ended it in a war, and that doesn't mean we solved the problem. But, when you end slavery or when you do something like that, normal people would give you an attaboy. Like that country ended slavery. They had slavery, now they don't. In the British Empire, because of William Wilberforce, I wrote a book on him, they didn't have a war. They ended the slave trade and then slavery without a war. Now that's way better. But they did it. They did it. So you have to say to somebody who improves, hey, I got to hand it to you. I'm glad you did the right thing. You're not done, but I'm glad. Let's celebrate you did the right thing, and then we'll talk about what you can do next tomorrow. But imagine if you have a kid, and you say to that kid, you're never going to change. You're bad from the beginning. You're just like your mother. You're just like your father. You'll never change. You are cursing them. That is a deeply powerful curse when you do that. And you can do that to a nation as well. You can do that to a nation. You can speak positive things, and you can speak life and love and hope with correction, obviously. Or you can curse something. You can say, you were bad from the beginning. You were bad. Forget about 1776. You started in 1619. You were evil then. You've been evil ever since, and I don't want to hear anything about it. You'll always be evil because you're white. You'll always be evil because you're American. Now that is called racism. So a biblical worldview that comes from love is totally different from that narrative. And so I grew up in a country, in a family where they understood that when you come from a place like East Germany, where you can be tortured and killed for talking about Jesus, they have a clue that flawed America is still way better than that place. And by the way, my father comes from Greece. The economic opportunities here. He worked so hard, but he knew that if you work really hard, you can accomplish a lot in America. You can work 3 jobs if you want. You can put money in the bank. In most other countries, you don't have that opportunity. You wish you did, and you don't. And that's why people come to America. I talk to cab drivers in New York all the time from every country in the world. What are they doing here? Well, they're here because they can make money here and send it home, or they can build a home here and they can bring their family here. They can't do that in their homes, most of them. So my parents got this. And my father, with his Greek accent, do you not think he dealt with people looking down on him because of his accent? Do you not think he dealt with, I don't know what you call them, they're bigots basically, right? And it was nasty people who hate foreigners and who hated him. He's told me stories. He lived through that. You don't need to be black or whatever. The point is, all around the world there is evil, and it manifests itself in a million ways. But my father said, you know what, I don't care, because I'm going to work hard, and because my kids will have it better than I did. And that's what he did. And to this day, with his accent, he can say, look what God has given me in this country. And my father and mother worked so hard. My mother cleaned houses so I could go to Yale University and learn cultural Marxism. Right? That's America. So when I got to Yale, I started seeing what today we call this woke culture, and I was really kind of amazed. I thought, this is interesting. But I was young and dumb enough to think, well, this is the way the elites think, so I should probably go along with the program. I didn't really know what I believed. I grew up in the Greek Orthodox Church, and like many churches, they didn't teach me anything about Jesus, about the Bible, whatever. You just kind of go there, keep your mouth shut, do the stuff, get some coffee, and go. They didn't teach me, okay? And for a long time, I was very bitter about that after I was born again. And today, by God's grace, I'm bitter and angry about it. So, well, but it's kind of a funny thing, because you realize a lot of churches, you go to church, you learn nothing, and then they send you off into the world, and you go to a place, God forbid, like Yale University, but most universities are like this right now, where if you don't know what you believe, if you don't know why America is good and exceptional and worth keeping and worth fighting for, and why these ideas are worth fighting for, you're just going to go with the flow because your friends believe a certain way. If you don't believe Jesus rose from the dead or any of that stuff, you're just going to be like, well, okay, I guess, now I'm here in college. I'm here to learn what's what. And it seems like he didn't rise from the dead, and that's what crazy people, in the middle of the country live. They cling to their guns and Bibles, and that's fine for them, but we're educated here, and we don't believe in that, right? So I kind of went with that flow. I drank the Kool-Aid. I remember one day, I mean, nothing's new under the sun, really, since the 60s. It's kind of funny. At our college in '84 at Yale, there was the woke thing of the day was there was apartheid still in South Africa, right? Now, we all know apartheid is wrong. And they had a thing about divesting the class's funds from South Africa. And everybody knew, oh, yeah, you gotta do that. Now, I had a friend who's an economics major who's liberal. But he said, that's actually not a good idea, and he explained it to me and stuff. And I thought, well, he just doesn't get it. I know how to vote. You better vote the right way. Well, the next day after the vote, the friend of mine who'd been manning the ballot box for our class to vote on this issue said to me, I said to him, very innocently, so, hey, how'd the vote go yesterday, And he said, yeah, it was great, except for your buddy Chris Haynes. I said, what? He said, yeah, he voted no, or he voted whatever, And I'll never forget it, because the one thing I remember my mother telling me about communism was, everybody, yeah, they have elections, but everybody has to vote for the candidate. It's a sham. And I realized, that's what I was dealing with as an undergraduate at Yale. my friend, by the way, knew how my other friend had voted, which also scandalized me. I was like, what the hell? You know how he voted, and you're telling me about it, how you disapprove of it, and you're manning the ballot box? That's like communist crap, excuse me. Are you serious? I mean, I remember being scandalized at that moment. But being young and dumb, I got over it in 10 minutes and I forgot all about it. But now I remember it as a moment where I thought, whoa, like this is weird. Interesting, huh? Okay. Well, another thing happened. In my senior year, the cool thing to do was to move off campus if you were kind of one of the artsy types, and I aspired to be an artsy type, wearing a thrift store jacket with holes and stuff. You can imagine how well that went over with my working class, working hard immigrant parents, right? Like, why do you have a coat with holes in it, Eric? We can afford to buy you a coat now. So, but I aspired to be cool. So I lived off campus, and while I was living off campus, a friend of mine. And again, I was kind of hanging with the sort of woke crowd. They didn't talk too much about politics, but they were in the arts and literature and stuff. If you're in hard science, if you're like a nerd, you avoid this junk because you're just like doing science or whatever, although that's changing too. But at the time, like the literature and the arts, whatever. So this friend of mine had a sister, and I get this, right? He was raised in a kind of a wealthy New York family, okay? And his sister, this is 1983, she did a semester in Moscow. Now, that's when it was still the United Soviet Socialist Republic. This was still the Soviet Union, okay? So to be the really cool anti-Reagan thing to do among the woke people was to, like, do a semester in Moscow, right? And in economics. So she comes back, and these really generous communists have given her, like, a ton of propaganda posters for free to distribute to her stupid woke friends in the West. And so my friend has like a ton of these like beautifully designed, Soviet-style posters and stuff, and says, hey, if you guys want any of these or whatever. And I was like, oh, cool, free poster, cool, right? I was like living on hot dogs. Like that was like giving me money. And so, wow. So like I picked one of Lenin, of Vladimir. It was just kind of a cool thing, and I put it on my door, in my closet, in the off-campus house. Well, one day my parents come to visit. Exactly. And I remember my father, at some point he sees it, and he says, Eric, where did you get that from? And I said something, whatever. And then he says, well, can I have a word with you? Now, my father is not like a Robert Young, fathers knows best, can I have a word with you, son? He's not that kind of a father. But this was so horrible to him that he became that way. That he said, I need to have a word with you. And so he takes me into the room and he says, that poster, but I want you to do me a favor. This is the man working his tail off so I could go to this university. He says, I want you to do me a favor. Would you do me a favor? Would you take that poster down for me? And it was as if the scales fell from my eyes. I realized what I had done. I realized how stupid. How could you be that stupid to be raised by these parents and then to forget all about that stuff and to put a poster of Lenin up? You might as well put a poster of Satan or Adolf Hitler. I mean, it's unbelievable how stupid young people, no offense, can be. Because I was a young person, and I didn't know any better. I was that dumb, but I'll never forget how ashamed I felt when my father asked me, would you do me a favor? Would you take that down? So those are two moments that I remember. But you know what, folks? I still kind of drifted along, and it was not until I found Jesus around my 25th birthday that everything changed for me. And even then, it didn't change instantly. Now, what was important changed instantly. I was born again and everything. But it takes time for your worldview to change. And sometimes, in many cases, unfortunately, the worldview of a born-again believer does not change or can change for the worse, as we now can see, right? People are not connecting all the dots. So I got saved. I still voted for Dukakis. I had to because he was Greek. And I was still excited as a Democrat to vote for Jesse Jackson to be the first black president in the primaries. I was so excited. Now, I look back on it now and I think to myself, it's kind of interesting because my thinking hadn't really caught up with what God had done in my life. But eventually, I would like to think that it did. But I'm here to tell you that as recently as like 6 or 7 years ago when I read this book by Os Guinness, I still didn't get basic stuff because it's not in the culture. And unfortunately, it's really not in most churches either. And it ought to be in both places. I'll talk about this tomorrow morning, but the relationship between faith and freedom is not just like a rah-rah, people who live in Texas love guns, love freedom, and they love church. It's not just coincidental. There is a deep connection between American-style self-government, liberty, and the good news of Jesus Christ, and I never knew that. Now, the fact is, you don't need to be a Christian to understand this stuff, but people like Ben Franklin, who was not a theologically orthodox Christian, nonetheless noticed that when people got religion, when people got Jesus, when George Whitefield preached up and down the 13 colonies and revival broke out, all the time the same thing happened. Crime went down. Domestic abuse went down. Alcoholism went down. What happened? And you don't even need to care why. You just observed it like a sociologist. You say, when people get crazy about Jesus, their ability to govern themselves goes up. They're able to be virtuous. They don't need big government telling them what to do and what not to do. And that's an idea called freedom, liberty, self-government. I never really understood that idea, right? To govern yourself, to have self-government, you need to be able to govern yourself. Why would you govern yourself? Because you answer to a higher authority. I don't need somebody to pull a gun on me to keep me from stealing. I don't steal because God doesn't want me to steal, and I want to please God. I do what I do or don't do, theoretically, hopefully, because I want to praise God, because I want to serve God, not because the government is forcing me to do it. Now, if the government is forcing you to do it, you're not free. And the founders understood this. I'll talk about this more tomorrow, but Os Guinness called it the golden triangle of freedom. He says, freedom, self-government, requires virtue. All of the founders, every one of them, even the French Enlightenment deists like Jefferson, they all got this. There was none of them that thought it was possible to have self-government and liberty that they were proposing without virtue. Not one of them thought it was possible. They knew only a virtuous people could handle this. Everyone knew it. There's a couple of famous quotes, but I've got others in my book if you can keep it. I mean, it's like they all got this. And then they also got, like sociologists, whether they're Christians or not, most of them were, but they understood that, by the way most people get that virtue thing that you need for liberty is from faith, period. They knew it. They saw it. And so even if you don't have faith, if you're living in a culture where a lot of people do, you kind of pick up that culturally speaking. It becomes the habits of the heart. This is the way we act in this town or in this state or whatever. And the founders all understood that unless you have robust expressions of faith, unless you have virtue, you cannot have liberty. But then imagine figuring the whole thing out and thinking, well, hey, if we need virtue and faith, why don't we just legislate that? Why don't we just force people to have faith and go to church, right? Well, you realize that you can't do that. You realize you cannot force people to have actual faith. You can force people to have fake faith because that's what they had escaped in Europe. They had all fled Europe because in Europe, if you lived in this country or this principality or that principality, you were forced by the leaders to attend that church and not that church. And if you attended that church, you'd be persecuted, sometimes horribly. They didn't figure out the whole religious liberty thing just because Luther was leaning in that direction. It didn't happen instantly. But in America, they began to figure this out. And by the time 1776 comes along, they understood We need to make religion utterly free. We cannot force religion. The church has to be free. People have to be free. In fact, and this is the price of freedom. Freedom means you have the freedom to screw up. You have the freedom to do it all wrong. But that's the price of freedom, right? In other words, if the government forces you to go to church, most people are going to go to church or they're going to do what they need to do, but they're not in it. They're not into it. They just do it because they have to. If you want people who live out their faith and exhibit virtue because they believe their faith, it has to come from them. Now, the government, there's some ways the government can encourage it, but there's no way the government can force it. So faith must be free. And that is why the founders understood that at the heart of this way of life has to be religious liberty, where the government takes no particular interest. Now, we always talk about they can't be the establishment of religion, right? We all heard that. It means that they can't establish a certain religion in a certain state or certain town or whatever. Well, you understand that we're now encountering a world where our governmental leaders and our cultural leaders, they're playing games with this because they say, well, that Jesus stuff, that's a religion, but atheism and agnosticism is not a religion. Well, I'm here to tell you that whenever you are coming down on issues that are of ultimate concern, issues of sexuality, issues of marriage, issues of the human body, issues of the human person. Whenever you're dealing with that stuff, you're dealing with religious issues, let's face it. And so if the government starts saying that we are going to establish this way of thinking, they have to be really, really careful. Are they encroaching on someone's religious liberty? And it would be no different than if the government forces everybody to go to church. That's not fair to everybody who's not a Christian, who's not a member of that denomination. So we have to think objectively. When we care about these things, it's not because we care about Christians, right? I mean, it's okay to care about ourselves, but let's get this right. It's about what is right for everybody. It's not about what's right for us. So even though we need to be angry when a governor or anybody overreaches and fundamentally, clearly doesn't understand any of this stuff, we need to push back hard when they do that. Because we, the people, we are the government, and we need to get that stuff. There's no question about that. So when it comes to issues in the churches and so on and so forth, we need to push back hard. But I'm telling you, we're not doing it for us. We're doing it because it's right. Because that kind of stuff is fundamentally un-American. Fundamentally un-American. If a group of people want to worship a block of stone someplace, it's none of our business. If a group of people want to raise their kids in a certain way, it's none of our business. That is called freedom. And some of those people will raise their kids wrong, and it's none of our business. That's the price of freedom. We need to respect freedom. People have the freedom to say and think stupid, wrong things. Do you understand? That's what freedom is. So if you believe certain things in your church and people think, well, you're a bunch of idiots, you know what? That's completely fine. You have the freedom, which was earned by the blood of patriots, to believe anything you like. Whether they think it's stupid or they approve of it, it's none of their business. That's called freedom on the American model. And if we don't understand how this stuff works, we are going to allow our leaders to oppress us and to treat us in such a way that we're not free. And once that happens, it's not just that we suffer. Freedom itself suffers, and everything goes downhill. You lose the republic. I'll talk about this more in the morning, but basically, it was Franklin who said to Mrs. Powell after they have the Constitutional Convention, she says, what have you given us, Dr. Franklin, a monarchy or a republic? He says, a republic, madam, if you can keep it. If you, the people, can keep it. Now, if you want to be oppressed, if you want to live in a tyrannous situation, if you want to have a big government over you, you don't have to do anything except what they tell you. You don't really have no responsibilities except what they tell you to do. But if you want to be free, you have some responsibilities. You have the responsibility to teach these things to your children, to learn these things yourself. And so when I learned these things and I wrote that book, I just thought, no wonder we are where we are in America, because for 50 years, we have not been teaching these things. We've not been teaching why this American idea of freedom is beautiful. It's exceptional. And the most exceptional thing about it is it's not self-serving. We would love to, and we have, shared these ideas with the whole world. And by the way, we would love our economic freedom to be such that we would get so rich that we could let anybody in and pay for everything. We can't, but the reason we don't is because we can't, not because we don't want to. We would love everyone to be an American, to assimilate, to fall in love with these ideas of liberty. But obviously, we have to understand how this works. And we have to understand that God did not bless us with these things here in America for us. Now, He loves us, and He wants to bless us, but you know and I know that whenever God blesses you, He blesses you to be a blessing. That's biblical, right? Now, not every American conservative will get that, but every Christian better get that. You are blessed to be a blessing. If God has given you freedom or treasure or good looks or whatever the heck He gave you, He didn't give it to you for you. He gave it to you so that you would use it for His purposes to bless others. And this nation has been so outrageously, unprecedentedly blessed that we have an obligation to the rest of the world because we're that shining city on a hill. We don't exist for ourselves. We are shining so that others will see it and they will say, what is that? I want that. I want that kind of freedom. I want to go there. And if I can't go there, I want to take those ideas and I want to bring those ideas here. I want my children to have those opportunities. I want my children to have freedom and opportunity. And folks, that is what is exceptional. And what I find funny about it is it's the opposite of boasting. It's to say that these beautiful ideas, which we didn't come up with, which we've been blessed to get free, like you get the good news of Jesus Christ for free. You can't say, I'm a Christian, and you're not, and you're an idiot. If you know these things, you have the humility to understand it's a gift you don't deserve, right? And that's just God's principle, and it applies to the blessings, not just the ultimate blessing of faith in Jesus, but it applies to every blessing, including the freedoms we have in this country. And the Lord wants us to use these blessings while we have time, while we are still here for His purposes. And we don't know how it's going to turn out. But let me tell you something. If you don't fight and if you don't do everything you can do, God will judge that. You might get saved, but it doesn't mean everything you do is okay. We have responsibilities. We've been blessed so outrageously that we have the responsibility first to stand up for these ideas in this culture and to push back as hard as we can against any foolish government official who does not understand this stuff. When I heard Senator Feinstein say to Amy Coney Barrett a few years ago, the dogma lives loudly within you, right? In other words, basically saying like, hey, you know, we got the set of rules in the Constitution. You're a Catholic Christian. You're really into that. And I don't think that's consonant with being able to apply the law. Like, that is a level of ignorance that is so staggering in an octogenarian senator of the United States of America. If you want to know how far we have come from where we have once were to where we are now, that an octogenarian senator, this is not a state senator who's 30 years old and stupid. This is an 80-something-year-old U.S. senator who doesn't understand religious liberty, who doesn't understand that most of the people who came up with the Constitution and who have applied the Constitution for 240-something years have been living with strong dogma like Amy Coney Barrett. She didn't know that. And that's a sign to us, folks, of how far we have drifted. It's not a young, dumb kid who just got into office and they're like, oops, I screwed up. No, this is someone, if she doesn't know better, we need to do some work. And we need to vote, obviously, but we need to take whatever videotape. I assume there's a videotape here that'll be online. I will share it. We need to share these things like crazy because the hour is short. And I will just conclude with this and then we'll have some Q&A. But the reason I'm so hopped up about this is because I realize that if we allow this country to take one step in the direction of third world corruption, you wash my back, I wash yours, one step in the direction of socialism, one step in the direction of not understanding religious liberty, one step, we go off the cliff. That's how bad things are. In 1980, it wasn't like this. If you voted for somebody else, whatever, I voted for Dukakis, we got over it. But can I tell you something? We're not there anymore. We've run out of room. We've run out of gas. We're on fumes. And we need to understand what is at stake right now. And I'm just here to tell you that don't do it for yourself. Do it for your kids. Do it for your grandkids. Do it for the urban poor who need to live in a country where instead of getting handouts, they get actual opportunity so they can have dignity. If you believe Black Lives Matter, you better know that the organization Black Lives Matter doesn't give a damn about black lives, and that their policies are going to destroy black lives. So you can virtue signal and say, yeah, I'm cool with that organization, and I got that, on my porch, Black Lives Matter, yeah, I'm cool, I'm down. Or you could actually do what God sees you doing and care about black lives by doing the right thing, by voting for such policies that are actually going to bless people in those communities that have been devastated for 50 years by democratic policies. I have to tell you, it is horrifying. I really think there's enough evidence now that tons of folks in those communities are waking up and understanding we've been taken for granted. This is not right. But the bottom line is the church has to lead. The church has to lead. Everything I said about faith and virtue, that's the church, folks. If we are alive to that and we live that out and we push back, we don't let the government get away with that stuff. Why? Just because we want to fight? No, because it is wrong. It is wrong. It hurts people. It will hurt unborn people. And I'm not talking about abortion. I'm talking about future lives will be devastated compared to what they could be if we do not speak up and do everything we can possibly do at this season.